Welcome to Chat with Nomads, where we uncover travel insights, business advice, adventure stories, and lifestyle tips with world travelers and digital nomads. Here is your host, Rax, from nomadsunveiled.com.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Chat with Nomads. Today we have with us Wendy from the Nomadic Vegan, and we are going to talk about traveling as a vegan. Hi Wendy, welcome to the show.
Hi Rax, thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on to talk about travel and especially as a vegan, because I know you have traveled to many places around the world. I think, is it 117 countries?
Yeah, well, not all of those were when I was vegan because I've been traveling for a long time now, basically my whole adult life. So more than 20 years, not to give away my age entirely, but yeah, I've been traveling, let's say 20 something years, living a sort of nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyle. And I became vegan about 7 years ago, 7.5, something like that. So I don't know exactly how many countries I've been to since becoming vegan. I'm thinking maybe 30 something. And I have traveled a lot in lots of, different continents. I've been to Africa, I've been to Asia, I've been to South America and Europe as a vegan. So yeah, I do have a lot of tips and tricks that I can share with people about that.
Yeah, that sounds good, because I was looking at your blog and there's a lot of guides in different cities and countries about where to eat and places to basically visit and stuff like that. I think that's going to be very interesting to talk about. Mainly so because some continents is obviously not easy to hunt for vegan food, right? So we'll definitely get down into that. But let's start off first by telling us maybe why do you choose to become vegan? Because you are not originally vegan or vegetarian, right?
Right. So I grew up eating everything. My family was not vegetarian or vegan. And I started looking into it. It was in 2014, and it was originally more for health reasons that I started getting interested in plant-based nutrition. I wasn't having any particular health problems myself, but my father had recently passed away from complications from type 2 diabetes, and he was in just a really terrible situation for the last couple of months of his life. He was completely bedridden, and I saw that and thought, I don't want to end up like that. And that's when it really kind of hit me hard, and I started thinking more about my own lifestyle choices and what kind of changes and decisions I could take to, improve my own health, and have a healthy long life in the long term. So that's how I stumbled upon plant-based nutrition and veganism. I didn't really know anything about it. I didn't know any vegans personally. I'd never met a vegan before. So it was just through the internet, and through listening to different, podcast interviews like this, with different experts, that I found out about the health benefits of eating a plant-based diet. And then I, continued to research and also found out about the environmental impacts of our food choices and, the huge environmental destruction caused by animal agriculture. And of course, also found out about the terrible things that are happening to animals in not just the meat industry, but also in the egg and dairy industries as well. And I'm an animal lover. I've always considered myself someone who loves animals. And I just realized that this was a decision that I needed to make in order to live in alignment with my own values. It didn't make sense to say that I love animals and then also be eating animals. So yeah, it was kind of a transition period of a few months when I didn't go from, one day to the next was eating everything and then the next day was totally vegan. It was a gradual transition. So I went vegetarian pretty early on, and then was, gradually cutting out other animal products as well. And really wanted to go fully vegan, but one of the biggest things that was holding me back was that I was afraid that it was going to ruin travel. And travel was a big part of my life and still is. And I didn't know if it was possible to find vegan food in some of the places that I'd already been, and also some of the places that I still wanted to go that I had on my wish list. So, that was kind of scary for me to think that I might not be able to visit these places if I was going to commit to being vegan all the time. So I decided to do like a trial run for vegan travel. My husband and I had already booked a trip to Greece. We were going to Greece for 3 weeks. And so I decided that I would try to eat only vegan for the 3 weeks that we were there in Greece. And if I was able to do that, then I might have to reevaluate, my ideas about how easy or hard I thought vegan travel was. And basically, I never looked back. And now I count my veganiversary. The day that I became vegan was the day that my plane arrived in Greece.
Wow.
Because, yeah, and that was September 10th, 2014. I can tell you the exact date. Um, because it was so much easier than I expected it to be. I was actually really surprised at how many vegan dishes there are in traditional Greek cuisine. I thought that I was going to be missing out on experiencing the local specialty dishes, that I wouldn't be able to try all these things. And of course, there are some local specialties that contain animal products, and so I didn't try those, but there were so many others that were vegan and that I had never heard of, and that honestly most tourists and travelers have also never heard of.
Mhm.
So, I did a bit of research beforehand and really got to delve into the local cuisine and learn about it, but from a vegan lens. And it kind of opened up this whole new world. And in addition to becoming a vegan traveler, I also became a foodie traveler because food wasn't really that important to me previously. When I was traveling, I would just eat whatever was cheap, whatever was easy and available. And now I do more research, and so I find out about what the local specialties are, and which ones I'll be able to try, and look for the best vegan and vegetarian or veg friendly restaurants to go to. And end up having really wonderful culinary experiences in during my travels that I wasn't having before. So it's actually enriched my travels and made them, not only did it not ruin travel, but it actually made travel even better for me.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I was actually, when you were talking about your story, I was actually wondering, like, prior to becoming a vegan, was food actually also a big part of traveling for you, right? Because you were saying you had the thought that, hey, if I become a vegan, I might not be able to enjoy certain places. So I was under the impression that maybe food was a really big part. But for you, it's really the opposite, whereby you really got into food because of being vegan, right? Because now you have to choose and figure out. I reckon you need to pre-plan, like kind of do a bit of research on what kind of stuff you're going to be able to eat and what kind of stuff you're going to avoid while you're in a certain country, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do some research beforehand, and I recommend that people do that because, the trip goes a lot more smoothly that way. But yeah, like I said, I wasn't a foodie traveler, and I didn't grow up as a foodie at all. In my family, no one really cooked. Like, um, I mean, my parents or my mom mostly prepared meals for us, at least when I was young, when I was a kid, but it wasn't home cooking. It was mostly something that came out of a box or a can, or later on it was microwave dinners when I got a bit older and was just doing my own thing. So food wasn't a priority in my household, and I didn't really grow up with much of an appreciation of food. But being vegan did, give me that appreciation for food. And now that, like I said, that has become a big part of my enjoyment of travel. So yeah, when I said that I was, worried that veganism was going to ruin travel, it was more just that I didn't know if it would be possible. Like, I didn't know if there was anything that I could eat. And so, going to this place would mean starving, and so then I just wouldn't be able to go. But actually, that's not the case at all. Like, I'll just tell everyone right now, you can be vegan anywhere. I've done it in lots of different places, some more vegan friendly than others, and obviously some places are easier than others. And there are places where you may not have a lot of options, and yeah, the food might not be the most exciting part of the trip, but it's definitely possible. So don't ever think that being vegan has to be a limitation and has to stop you from going to where you want to go.
That's interesting because I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan in any sense. Like basically for me, food is a big part, and I like to eat whatever the local cuisine is. And now being in South America, obviously meat is like a big part of it. But I've actually traveled with some vegetarians and vegan travelers before. I meet them and then I just travel. Especially in South America, I always find that there's an issue of finding, no, let's not even talk about vegan, right? Let's talk even about vegetarian, right? It's already
Right.
difficult to find because like we go to, for example, we go to a market in Cusco, Peru, right? And then my friend will ask the vendor like, hey, do you have vegetarian options? And then they'll be like, yeah, we do. And then she's like, what's the vegetarian option? And then she'll be like, it's rice and then with like the salad, which is kind of the side of a typical meat dish, and then with
Right.
like chips and fries, right? It's basically taking portions of whatever is in that is in the main dish that is non-meat based and then lumping them together to make it a vegetarian dish. And I was like,
Right.
shit, this is tough, man. So, but you have obviously found it at least feasible to do it. Are there any certain tips or ways that you, or research methods that you use to find where to eat before you go for a trip?
Sure, yeah. My number one resource that I recommend is an app, and it's also a website called Happy Cow, and it's a crowdsourced directory, worldwide directory of vegan and vegetarian and veg-friendly restaurants all over the world. And not just restaurants, they've also added some other types of businesses that are useful for travelers as well. So, example, you can have vegan or vegan friendly B&Bs, and other types of accommodation. Sometimes they'll list stores like health food stores or organic food stores where you can find more kind of vegan specialty products if you're looking for that. So yeah, Happy Cow is the first thing that I check when I'm planning a trip to a new destination. And depending on the destination, that might be all the research that I do, because already there I see a huge list of, of restaurants where I can eat. And then the problem just becomes, choosing out of that huge list, like what are the best ones and which ones do I want to make sure that I get a chance to try. And that's becoming more and more the case, really, especially I'd say in Europe. I'm based in Lisbon in Portugal, so I do a lot of traveling around Europe. And honestly, in most cities and towns in Europe these days, you do have lots of options, whether it's purely vegetarian or vegan restaurants or just other restaurants that are adding vegan options onto their menus because they see that the demand is really growing, and they're responding to that and catering to that demand. There are other locations where you won't see as many options listed in Happy Cow, but if that happens, don't freak out, because that definitely does not mean that there is no vegan food in that particular destination. It just means that maybe you're going somewhere that's kind of off the beaten track that not many other travelers have been to before. And so because it's a crowdsourced directory, then obviously that means that there are going to be fewer people adding entries in for that location. So then you might need to do a bit more research on your own. I would then suggest researching the local cuisine and, just find out what people eat there. That's not hard to do on the internet. For basically any country's cuisine, you can find out what the popular dishes are and what kind of ingredients are used. And that'll give you an idea of what kind of things you can ask for in a restaurant and also what kind of things to avoid. For example, in, let's say, Thailand, you may see lots of dishes that look like it's just vegetables and tofu and rice, but actually they've got some kind of shrimp paste or some kind of fish sauce that have been added into the mix when they were creating the sauce. So, it's a good idea to learn the words for those particular ingredients in the local language. Maybe have someone who speaks that language type out on a little card one or two sentences explaining what you don't eat, possibly also explaining, giving examples of things that you do eat. Because if you just go into a restaurant and say, I don't eat meat, I don't eat fish, I don't eat eggs, I don't eat any dairy products, what can you make for me? Then, they might be a little bit taken aback and say, I don't know. But if you take a different approach and say, well, I don't eat any animal products, but I do eat, grains. I eat rice and quinoa and any other grains, pasta, as long as it doesn't have eggs in it, that's fine. Any kind of vegetable, any kind of legume like beans or chickpeas or lentils, whatever the popular ingredients are in that particular place, things that you think that they're likely to have in their kitchen, you can suggest a few of those, and then they'll, and a lot of it comes down to your attitude as well. If you're very demanding and pushy about it, then they might be less likely to help you. But if you smile and, be friendly, then they're probably going to be friendly back to you as well.
Got it. So happy cow is basically almost like the first layer of filter you use, right? If you see a long list there, you'll be like, okay, I'll be fine here and then I don't have to do anything else. Whereas only when you
Yeah.
see like a short list, then you dive deeper, right? And
Yeah.
I really like the part that you're saying about researching on the ingredients, because I think that resonates with what you mentioned just now about like becoming a foodie traveler, in terms of like, it's kind of like you have to look into the ingredients, and your ideology seems to be like you have grown to like doing it. Like it becomes a part of learning the culture of a certain country or city on what ingredients are they well known for, so that when you go to a place you can it's kind of a balance as well, right? Because you're saying like you shouldn't go there with an attitude that I don't need all this and then like just make me whatever. But you also learn about it and then tell them that, hey, maybe this could be a good combination for me to try.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like the way that you said that, because yeah, it has become a way for me to learn more about the culture, and it's opened this new window onto this place and culture, and helped me to learn more about it in a way that I wouldn't otherwise. It's also, it's a conversation starter. I mean, I love learning different languages, for example, and trying to speak the local language a bit with people. But I'm also very shy, and particularly if I'm not confident in my language skills, then I might be very shy about trying to speak to the locals. But if I have to get this information across, like I need to tell them I am vegan, this is what it means, can you please help me eat something, then that gets the conversation started. And then very often they're curious about it, and they want to know, oh, why do you eat this way? And and so then I get the opportunity to have conversations with local people, and to learn more about the place that way as well.
Yeah, I really love that, because the opposing argument is definitely that, hey, this is such a hassle. Like I need to learn about all this, and then I need to pick up the language, and then I need to the negative thought will be that, screw it, let's just be like an optional vegan in some places, right? Which is pretty common for some travelers. But I think it boils down to what you said just now. It's really about the attitude, that you have an open mind about learning, and especially about like just seeing it as a process of exploring the country, even like, right? Like it's not a hassle, it's just another way of getting in an extra conversation and learning more about the ingredients, learning more about the people, especially on the specialty of every region even, right?
Exactly. Yes. No, I love everything that you just said. Yeah, I believe that so much of it comes down to attitude, and your experience is largely going to be shaped by the attitude that you bring to the experience. If you go in with a very negative attitude and you think, oh, this is going to be so difficult, they're not going to have anything for me, they're going to be rude, then if you're looking for that, that's probably what you're going to see and what you're going to find and experience. But if you go into it kind of, yeah, with a more open and positive attitude, and kind of looking more for abundance. I mean, I don't want to sound too woo woo, like law of attraction and that kind of stuff. But I really do think that does have a huge impact. I mean, two different people can look at the same menu, and one person would think, oh, they only have one vegan option, that's terrible. But how many options do you need? Like, if you're just eating one meal there, you just need the one. So just be thankful that they do have a vegan option that they've added to the menu, and some places won't. But that also doesn't mean that they can't make a vegan meal for you, or there may be options that are listed that are actually vegan, and they just haven't marked them that way because they're not aware of that, or they're not thinking about it that way. But if you do the research about the cuisine and the dishes, then once you see the name of a dish that you may recognize from your research, then you'll know, hey, actually maybe that is something that I can try. And then you can ask them, if you want to be sure, what does this have? Does it have cheese on it? Oh, well, could you leave off the cheese? And then would it be vegan? And things like that. So, yeah, I think that attitude really makes or breaks the experience, not just in the sense of, traveling as a vegan, but the whole travel experience, the whole experience of life really kind of comes down to our attitude about it in a lot of ways.
Yep, that's true. So are there any places where you ever had a hassle? Because I know that Europe is probably one of the easiest continent to find vegan food or vegetarian food even, right? But in
Yeah.
places like, I reckon South America is difficult in some sense, especially if you are in the cities, the capital cities, I think it's still relatively easy. But when you get down to smaller towns, it gets a bit difficult. And I'm not too sure about, is it easy to find in Africa, which you have also been. So which cities have you, or which continents, places have you found it like tougher to really find vegan food?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, and it can vary a lot from one country to the next too, so one country in South America might be very different from even the neighboring country. So just speak briefly about South America. I traveled, my most recent trip there was to Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay. And I would say Brazil was probably the easiest, which would maybe surprise a lot of people because they think that, meat is a huge part of Brazilian culture and cuisine and the economy and everything. Like it's a big part of their identity, which is true. But there is also a growing movement, a vegan movement in Brazil as well. So especially in the big cities, like you said, in Rio de Janeiro and in São Paulo, you'll find a huge number of vegan and vegetarian restaurants. Also in smaller cities, Curitiba, which is more in the south, yeah, there were lots of veg restaurants there too. And then when you're in smaller places, the biggest tip for Brazil that I can give people is to go to the kilo restaurants, is often how they call them, because it's a buffet, but it's not an all-you-can-eat buffet. It's pay by weight.
So basically you pick, you select, and then put onto a box, and then after that they weigh it, and based off the weight, that's the charge, right?
Exactly, yes. And these are really popular all over Brazil. You'll find them absolutely everywhere. And then you get to choose what you eat, which dishes you want to put on your plate. And they'll almost always have beans and rice. That's a really standard staple food in Brazil. You can pretty much always find beans and rice, and then probably a couple of other vegetable dishes as well. And you can easily make up a full meal, like a really balanced, healthy meal out of that. Occasionally, you'll find that they've added little bits of meat to the beans. So, you do need to take a look and make sure. But those are generally really easy places to eat if you don't find anything on Happy Cow that looks like it's specifically vegan friendly. Then I would say just go to one of these kilo restaurants. And also when you're traveling by bus, for example, because Brazil has really long distances between cities. It's a really huge country, but it has a great bus network and some of the most comfortable buses I've ever traveled on anywhere. Argentina as well. I'd say Argentina and Brazil have some of the best buses in the world. So I traveled the country completely by bus. I didn't take any flights. And yeah, went basically all the way from São Luís de Maranhão in the north all the way down to the Pantanal in the south. So huge distances. And the buses, when they stop for meal stops, they will usually stop at one of these kilo restaurants. So that's really convenient because otherwise, you're just stuck with wherever they drop you. They'll only give you like 20 minutes to eat a meal. So you have to eat really quickly with whatever's there. And in another country, it might be a lot more limited. But in Brazil, I found that it wasn't a problem because it was usually one of these buffets where I could choose what I wanted to eat. So yeah, Brazil was surprisingly easy. Paraguay, I would say, was probably the most difficult. But Paraguay is not a very popular destination anyway, so there probably aren't many people who are planning to go there, which is I won't say just as well. I mean, honestly, there's not a lot to see in Paraguay. I mean, I
Yeah.
went because I want to go everywhere. Like I'm just curious about the world in general. So there's nowhere that I don't want to go because I think everywhere is interesting in some way just to see what it's like. But there aren't very many, sites per se, like tourism sites that would attract people to Paraguay. And the food, yeah, the local cuisine just doesn't have very many plant-based dishes for whatever reason. But there was one restaurant in the capital in Asuncion that did actually have. It was a mainstream restaurant, so they also served meat, but it had a whole vegan section of the menu with some really wonderful dishes, and they even had some vegan versions of Paraguayan dishes, like they had, made them vegan, changed them so that they were vegan. So I did get to try the local specialties as well in a vegan version.
That's nice.
Yeah, and that's usually the case. I mean, in most places that I've been to nowadays, it's becoming more and more common. In 7 years ago when I first became vegan, there weren't nearly as many options as there are now. But now the movement is definitely growing, and so yeah, lots of places are offering vegetarian and vegan versions of their local specialty dishes. And that's the kind of thing that you'll find in Happy Cow. So I do recommend downloading that app because, you won't find those dishes everywhere, but if you know which specific restaurants are offering these veganized specialties, then you can go check them out.
Yeah, I'm seeing like in continents whereby plant-based diet is not like a big thing, it's mainly the countries that get hit with a lot of tourists that starts changing the fastest because obviously when tourists come in, there's that market for it, right? And
Yeah.
veganism or vegetarian are growing community. I would say like that's definitely a larger number.
Mm-hmm.
And countries are seeing the need. And just something interesting is that yesterday there's this tradition of eating locro, which is a dish that is a stew dish with corn, but also with meat like chorizo and stuff inside, right? And nowadays you can even find vegetarian locro in certain stores, yeah. So you can see like there's definitely the trend of catering to a plant-based diet.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
I'm curious about this because I know that there are usually nutritional issues or considerations for vegetarians or vegans. I think it's usually, and I'm not sure I'm right about that, but I think it's like zinc and B12. That's usually the lacking
B12.
nutrition. Yeah. So do you feel, because now you're not only just doing vegan at home, right? If you're at home, you could maybe have an easier option of planning and prepping for it to get enough nutrition. But now you're also traveling. So are there any concerns about like getting sufficient nutritional stuff into your body?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, B12 is the one nutrient that is not available in plants. It's actually not available in animals as well either. It comes from a bacteria which is in the animal-based foods because anyway, I won't go into the scientific details, but the bottom line is that you do need to take B12 supplements as a vegan. So I do that at home and I also do it when I'm traveling, and you can buy them really cheaply, and it's just a little teeny small pill. Most of the times you take it like twice a week or 3 times a week. So that's something that every vegan should do. And then as far as other, having a more balanced and healthy diet in general, a lot of people are concerned about protein. Honestly, we don't need as much protein as the animal agriculture industry wants us to think that we do. And a lot of people in the West, especially, actually get too much animal protein, and that is an underlying cause of a lot of major health issues that people in the United States are facing and in other countries as well. So I don't worry too much about protein, but I do try to make sure that I have at least one meal a day that has a food that's high in protein, and that could be any kind of legume like beans or chickpeas or lentils, tofu if you're in an Asian country, then or tempeh as well, seitan, which is from wheat gluten, and so that's not as common to find, but you'll see it sometimes in Asia as well. Quinoa is a good source of protein, and that's useful if you're traveling in South America, especially the Andean regions and around Peru or Bolivia. So Yeah, I mean, it might, you probably won't be eating quite as balanced or healthy of a diet as you would be at home. Or I don't know, maybe you just eat vegan junk food at home all the time as well. Like, because that's also really easy to do these days. We have the Beyond Burgers and vegan cheese, and like there's all kinds of vegan foods that are not healthy at all,
Yep.
that are available. But I mean, you probably will be eating pretty healthfully because it's probably going to be largely whole foods, in terms of vegetables and grains and legumes and things like that. Like that's what's going to be available to you because those foods are available everywhere. Whereas the vegan junk food, that's kind of a niche market that you're
Yep.
more likely to have access to at home, but not when you're traveling in these off the beaten track places.
Got it. And one question about the B12 supplement, because I think this will be interesting for other tourists to know as well. Like, I reckon you can get it easily in Europe. Do you always bring it? And have you found it in places like South America where, it's not as common? Is it like widely
Right.
available?
I've always brought it with me just to be safe, because I think that's the easiest thing to do. You probably can find it in most places, but I think it's a good idea just to bring it with you.
Okay, okay. And let's talk about cost, because I know that I have traveled a journey before with like two backpackers that are both vegetarian. And so then I have to be vegetarian because it just makes sense and I didn't really mind. But we cooked a lot back then. And I realized that when you cook as a vegetarian, it's like really cheap. It's like really, really cheap. Like the amount I
Mm-hmm.
spend on food is so minimal compared to what I would usually spend, right? But I also recognize that there are also this fancy vegetarian or vegan places whereby the meal is quite special and exquisite, right? And those actually cost a lot. It's a bit of a balance between like veggies are cheap, but because of the health condition or the health trend, there's a certain cost attached to it now. It's almost like chicken breast, right? Like chicken breast, the least tastiest part, and the thighs or the drumsticks used to be the tastiest part. So that should be the most expensive. But now chicken breasts are the most expensive because of the health trend and the demand for it, right? So how has it affected your cost of travel when you changed to a vegan?
Yeah, good question. My cost honestly probably did go up, because like I said, me becoming vegan also coincided with me being more interested in food and wanting to have better, gastronomical experiences while I was traveling. So whereas before I would have just gone to McDonald's all the time, when I became vegan, that wasn't an option. And so, yeah, if I was going to eat out in restaurants, then it probably was going to be a bit more expensive than the options that I had been choosing previously. Because, yeah, I was basically just going for whatever was cheap and convenient. So, yeah, that is a consideration. But like you said, if you cook for yourself, it is dirt cheap.
Yeah.
um, to buy, beans and vegetables and rice and things like that. And it's a shame that there's such a markup because it's the same foods basically that are being sold in the restaurants, but because it's trendy, they can get away with raising their prices. It doesn't happen in all restaurants. Like I have been to vegan and vegetarian restaurants that are very reasonably priced, and I really hope to see more of that in the future. But it's a mix. Yeah, some places are a bit pricier. I don't go to really fancy gourmet restaurants. Like that's, I don't know, that's not really the kind of experience that I'm looking for. But yeah, even so, sometimes the restaurants are probably a bit more expensive than what I would have chosen in the past.
Yeah, that's one of the issues I have with like eating at vegetarian or vegan places, because I always look at it and I don't know if this is a worldwide concept or it's just me. I always felt like meat it should cost more than vegetables because that's the generic cost, right? And I always find that meat dishes are supposedly worth more because of that. And when I'm paying like a higher price for a vegetarian dish versus a meat dish, I always be thinking like, this doesn't seem to make too much sense for me, kind of feeling. And
Uh
that's
huh.
that's one of the concerns. But I did go to this place in again Cusco, Peru, where they have this very fancy dish whereby I can't remember. I think it's mushrooms with some stuff, and when he lift up one of the pots, there was smoke coming out and stuff like that. I was like, wow, this is like another level of dish creation in that sense. But that probably kind of makes it more worthwhile in the sense that you are really going for the experience and culinary skills rather than just purely having a meal.
Yeah, and I agree with you that the meat should cost more. I mean, in terms of the environmental impact and all of like it's a very kind of inefficient way to produce food because you have to produce a lot more grain to feed the animal and then eat the animal than if you were just producing the grain to then eat that grain yourself, you know. So yeah, and then there's a lot of different types of pollution and stuff that comes with it. So it should cost more. Unfortunately, a lot of countries subsidize their animal agricultures, and so the price for those products is artificially low, and then that gets reflected in the prices in the restaurants as well. But I think that's something that's going to have to change very soon because, the current worldwide consumption of meat is just not sustainable. And so I think that is one reason that we see a growing interest in vegan and vegetarian lifestyles is because people are realizing the environmental impact of this industry and want to live in a more kind of environmentally friendly way.
Yeah, there's a local that told me that there's more cows than humans in Argentina. I was like, are you serious? And meat is really cheap here comparatively to the rest of the world. So that's definitely, I think, part of the issue, right? Since we're on the topic of food, and food is always a nice topic to talk about, let's touch a bit on the vegan and vegetarian food in different countries, because I imagine a lot of people have the perception of vegetarian food, right? Like salads and stuff like that. But obviously, I see that you have been to places like Asia, and there is this concept of what we call zai, which is like vegetarian. And these dishes of zai is basically referring to vegetarian dishes for the listeners. And I reckon it was created for the purpose of religion, right? For the Buddhists and stuff. And that cuisine is actually if you just look at it visually, it's a very different dish compared to what I think someone from the Western world would imagine as vegetarian, right? And if you have been to India, India is actually primarily a vegetarian-based diet country, right? So they basically call it veg and non-veg. There's no meat dish, right? So there are actually a lot of differences between the vegetarian dishes all around the world. So tell us a bit more about your experiences with all these different cuisine, and that I reckon it can still be a very interesting gastronomical experience in different parts of the world as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And a lot of countries do have, a tradition and a history of eating vegan or vegetarian that in some cases dates back hundreds, if not thousands of years, as you said, relating to the Buddhist tradition or the Buddhist religion or the Hindu religion, other Asian religions as well. And it may not be that everyone in that country eats a vegetarian or vegan diet all the time, but they do still have this tradition. And it may be that just the monks eat in this way. And then the lay people may do it at certain times of the year, for certain festivals and things like that, which you actually have that in the West too. Well, the east of the West. You have it. You have it in the Orthodox Christian countries, which is mostly in Eastern Europe, also Greece, and also Ethiopia. Even in Africa has the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as well. So in those countries, they have what they refer to as fasting. But when I say fasting in English, typically that means eating nothing at all. But in this sense, that's not what it means. They still eat, but they just don't eat certain foods. And it varies a little bit from country to country as to what the exact rules are for fasting, but it's pretty much a vegan diet or an almost vegan diet. So that's kind of an easy shortcut that you can take if you're traveling in Eastern Europe or in Greece or Russia or Ethiopia, is you can ask for fasting food, which is one of the first things I learned when I was on that Greece trip back in 2014. And, when I was trying to be a vegan traveler for the first time. And back then, people didn't really know the word vegan in Greece. I think now it's changed a lot. but I don't think I ever ate in a fully vegan restaurant in Greece. And I think I ate in a vegetarian restaurant only once, or only one restaurant that I ate at a few times. But the rest of the time, I was just in mainstream restaurants. But I could say the word nistissimo, which is the Greek word for fasting food. And if I asked for that, then they would say, oh, yeah, we have this and this and this. And, there were actually lots of options. So you have, the fasting tradition in the Orthodox countries, which because of that, that has meant that lots of plant-based dishes have been created, within that cuisine. And then, in India, as you said, I mean, India is the best country in the world to be vegetarian, I would say. Vegan is just a little bit trickier because they do use a lot of milk products, especially in the north of India. Not so much in the south. In the south, they're more likely to use coconut milk rather than cow's milk. So it's a bit easier to avoid there. But in the north, I mean, there's still plenty of options, but you just have to be really clear about, that you don't want any of the milk products. And it's probably best to just list them off individually, saying, I don't want curd, which is it's the yogurt, basically. It's
Yep.
the local word for yogurt. I don't want ghee, which is the clarified butter that they use as a cooking fat. And they can use oil instead of ghee. It's not a problem if you ask them to do that. A lot of the cheaper restaurants will use oil anyway because oil is cheaper than ghee. But, you just need to be clear and make sure that they don't put any of those kind of milk-based ingredients into the dish. But other than that, I mean, the food in India is amazing. I absolutely adore Indian food. Taiwan is another place that just has a huge variety of food, of so many different kinds of dishes, and also has, this very long tradition of vegan and vegetarian eating for religious reasons, and now more recently also has a pretty strong vegan movement, animal rights-based vegan movement among the younger generations as well. So Taiwan is amazing for vegan travel. That's probably one of my favorite places. I mean, all of China is as well. It's just that if you don't speak Chinese, it's harder to communicate in China than it is in Taiwan, and they're not as familiar with veganism, whereas the Taiwanese are quite familiar with veganism. How is it in Singapore? Because I haven't been to Singapore in quite a few years.
I think in Singapore it's easy to find like vegetarian. I'm not too sure about vegan, to be honest, because there's obviously another level, and there's always a difficulty in terms of avoiding. I think a few core ingredients that are difficult to skip out is always cheese and milk.
Yeah, but in the local cuisine, do you use much cheese and milk? I wouldn't think that they would be using it much anyway.
Not really, actually, not in the local cuisine, but because Singapore is so international, right? So when you look at the food scene, apart from our cultural food and cuisines, you always get the international food. So, which is why vegetarian and vegan food, I assume, should be easy to find because there will be restaurants catering to this group.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like the people are up to trend with this kind of stuff, right? And the cultural cuisine, in terms of Chinese, like I say, there are this Thai food that we talk about, which is mainly for vegetarian for sure. And those are easy to find. And if you go to certain temples, and this I'm a bit more familiar with just because my parents are religious. So they have been tilting towards the vegetarian diet. So there are certain restaurants that just serve purely vegetarian food. And I think it's easy to have them as vegan because obviously cheese and milk are not like common ingredients in the Chinese cuisine. And I reckon in Indian food, you can probably also find vegetarian food. But like you say, in terms of vegan, things like ghee and stuff are commonly used in the cooking. Those might need to be clarified to see if they use it. But it should not be a problem, in my opinion, to be a vegetarian or vegan in Singapore. It should be quite straightforward.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think it would be a pretty easy place and lots of different options because you have so many different cuisines there as well. There's such an interesting mix of people and ethnicities. So I think it would be a really great food destination in general and probably for vegans as well.
Yeah, for sure. That Singapore is definitely a food destination compared to just purely attractions because like, I mean, we are not very big, right? So I always say like, not many people stop in Singapore for very long because they see that it's just a small country. but then there
Mhm.
is not enough meals. If you only take 3 meals a day, there's not enough meals to cater to trying out the cuisines. So that's always an
Right.
issue. Yeah, and it's
Mhm.
funny because we were talking about this, and I was just writing up another interview questionnaire for another blog, and then they were asking like, where's your favorite places? Like, what's your favorite cuisines? I was just writing like Korea, Taiwan, and India are basically like the 3 places I will always go for food. And that's kind of
Mm.
experience as well in terms of India and Taiwan, at least that are good places
Yeah.
for eating. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so let's talk a bit about, because I know you travel with your husband quite a lot,
Mhm.
I assume, and he's not vegan, right?
Actually, he is vegan now.
Oh, you have
Um,
converted him then.
yeah, he didn't go vegan at the same time that I did. So initially we were traveling together and, with just me being vegan and him not. So that was a little bit more of a challenge. I mean, we just had to compromise basically, which, you always have to do in relationships. That's a big part of what a relationship is because yeah, he would want to go to like a really traditional local place to try the local foods, but then they wouldn't have very many options for me. So, we would say, okay, well, you can choose where we go to eat for lunch, and then I'll choose where we go to eat for dinner. And, we made it work that way. I will admit that it's a lot easier now that we're both vegan. um, because now we both want the same things, and so we can just look on Happy Cow and see which restaurants seem to be the best options for vegan food, and then we both want to go there, and that's great. Yeah, if you're traveling with non-vegans, then yeah, you just have to compromise. I mean, I don't mean compromise in the sense of, well, you're gonna have to eat non-vegan food sometimes. No, you can still stay vegan yourself, but you might not get to eat where you want, or your preferred place for every meal. So yeah, and if you're traveling with, say, non-vegan friends, for example, and you're planning a trip together, I would suggest that, that's something you should talk about beforehand, and, kind of make it clear what your needs are and your expectations, and kind of set boundaries and things like that. Maybe set a rule like, yeah, you choose the place for lunch and I choose the place for dinner, or maybe your friend is perfectly happy to eat vegan along with you, to go to vegan restaurants with you, but it is something that you should probably talk about beforehand.
Yep, yep. And how do you convince him to become a vegan, basically?
I think just leading by example, honestly. I mean, I didn't talk about it that much. I tried not to be preachy, and, honestly, it was kind of difficult for me because, when I first went vegan, it was like my eyes were suddenly opened to, all of these things that were always happening, but I just had kind of shut my mind off to it and wasn't really thinking about it. And then suddenly I was seeing everything in a different light, whereas before I would be eating a meal of, say, fried chicken, and I just thought it was a really delicious meal, and now suddenly I was seeing a dead body, of an innocent animal, and so it was hard for me to watch him eating animals and then me, not eating, and honestly, that was challenging. Just more from a kind of morality perspective, me struggling with my newfound ethics and morals, and trying to live inside a non-vegan world with a vegan mentality, which I think gets easier over time because you just kind of learn to accept this, whereas when you're new to it, and it's like you're in the matrix, and suddenly you took the red pill and you realize that the world is completely different from the way that you thought it was, and that's kind of tough to accept in the beginning. So, but yeah, in terms of us traveling, it wasn't a huge problem, and I think it would be easier now because there are more options and there are more mainstream restaurants that have added good vegan options onto their menus. So there are more places where both vegan and non-vegans can have a good meal.
Got it. And when you travel, do you carry along, like, for example, you were saying you bring along B12 supplement, right? Do you also
Hmm.
bring along, I don't know, like spices for cooking, or you bring along certain snacks that you like just
Mm,
in case you are, you go to a meal and you don't feel fulfilled because they probably don't have like
Right.
good vegan food. Are there stuff that you bring along?
I do usually bring some kind of emergency snack stash, like some emergency food stash that I bring just so that I know that I always have something. Usually these days it's not really necessary. Like I might not end up eating any of that food, but it just gives me peace of mind to know that it's there, because then I know that I'm not going to starve, like whatever happens, like I always know that I have something in my bag that I can eat. So yeah, I would recommend doing that, and it can just be some snacks like granola bars, or the kind of raw date snack bars. Those are really handy for traveling. Our most recent trip was walking the Camino de Santiago through Spain and Portugal, which is actually something that we do every year. We walk a different route of the Camino de Santiago. So this was our 5th one. And on the particular one that we did this year, we were walking through really remote areas of both Spain and Portugal. So for that, I did carry more food than I would typically. And sometimes we really needed it. So it really came in handy. And we carried things like fried fava beans, which is a pretty common snack food here in Portugal. You can buy them where you would buy nuts and chips, potato chips and things like that. You'll often see bags of fried fava beans as well, which are, nutritious. They're a good source of protein, so they're quite filling. They'll fill you up. I mean, they're not, the fried part makes them probably a bit less nutritious, but but anyway, there's still good nutrition in there. And bars, and in most cases we don't tend to cook very often when we travel. We tend to eat out for most meals. So we don't usually bring spices. We just brought salt and pepper when we were on the Camino. So we could, if we were making sandwiches or something like that, we could at least season it to give it a little bit more flavor. But that depends on, the individual traveler. Like some people may want to do a lot more cooking, whether it's to keep the cost down or just because they enjoy cooking or whatever. In that case, yeah, I think it does make sense to bring a few spices and things like that with you.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And to summarize, right, or as a final question, what will be your best tips for vegan travel?
All right. Well, I've talked already about, doing some research beforehand. I think that is really important. So like I said, Happy Cow, the website is happycow.net, and you can access all the information there for free, or you can download the app, which I think might cost a few dollars to download, but it's totally worth it. It's one of the best investments you'll make if you're, looking to find vegan food or vegetarian food while you're traveling. So definitely that. And attitude we've talked about as well. I do think that that's crucial going into the whole experience with the positive attitude. I've got several more tips that I wrote and compiled together in an ebook, which you can actually download for free on my website. It's called 9 Steps for Easy Vegan Travel. And if you just go to thenomadicvegan.com, which is my blog, you'll find a picture of the book there on the homepage, and you can click it and download it totally for free. So maybe that's the easiest thing to do, is just direct people to there.
Yep, sounds good. I'll definitely include like the links to your website and also your social. Where can people find you basically? Give us a brief overview on how do people look for you and your stories and your tips to vegan travel.
Yeah. So the website is, the main place where you'll find all of my different guides, vegan guides to different locations and various tips and things. So that's thenomadicvegan.com. And then I'm also on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest. In most cases, it's nomadic_vegan. I think Facebook is the only exception. They don't believe in underscores at Facebook for some reason, so you're not allowed to have that in your name. But if you search for Nomadic Vegan, you'll find me there for sure.
Cool. Thanks, Wendy, for coming on today to share about traveling as a vegan, because I think a lot of people will find the information very useful.
Thank you for listening to Chat with Nomads. Please remember to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And be sure to share with your friends. Also, we'd love to know what topics you'd like to hear more about. To stay updated on the latest, join us on our mailing list at chatwithnomads.com. You can also find more travel and nomading tips at Nomads Unveiled. That's Nomads UNVEILED.com. Start living your dreams today. We'll catch you in the next episode.